Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition, which currently carries the Gygaxian narrative engine, colloquial known as Dungeons & Dragons, and how it has far surpassed video games as a narrative engine. So what is a narrative engine? A narrative engine is when story is used to transform a person, okay? And there are five narrative engines that have existed in the history of humanity. There is Shamanic Tale. There is the book that came around in the 15th century. There is the American big screen and small screen. That's been around for 100 years, okay? And by the way, it's dying now. The big screen's going to be dead in about a year or two. That's already happened. It's a chicken with a head cut off. There's still movement there, but that thing is dead. And then video games. Video games are really only about 30 years old, right? So I'm counting. Actually, no, I'm sorry. Let's call it 1980, and so it's 4 decades old. So video games are 4 decades old. Now I know there were a few video games before then, but I'm talking massive scale, like thousands of people. Yeah, I think I got an Atari 2600 close to 1980, and at that point they were showing up in people's houses. There were hundreds of thousands, if not low millions, of people that were interacting with video games. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about mass use, not a couple people playing Pong at MIT, right? So when it comes to video games, they're 4 decades old, right? And actually, they're not even as old as Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons has been doing its thing since 1974. And in 1974, that thing started, gaining major distance and power and momentum. And by 1981, just to put it into perspective, Gary Gygax was headed off to Hollywood to make a Saturday morning 80s cartoon, right? Whereas video games were still finding their feet. Now video games aren't much, they're close. Like, Dungeons & Dragons is 5 decades old, and video games are, at the macro level, at the level where people are really using them, is only 4 decades old, right? Now, commercially, let me explain. Absolutely, video games have surpassed Dungeons & Dragons as a narrative engine. But as far as their capability, they are swiftly falling behind, okay? And so, one, I do want to say, I do understand video games are probably the narrative engine that is... Yeah, let's get into this. Yeah. Actually, video games, without a doubt, I think, are the Gygaxian narrative engine's greatest competition today as far as numbers of people whose lives are being impacted and are being transformed by story. The problem is they shouldn't be, right? So, one, here's my take, okay? I think Gygaxian, video games very much are a narrative engine. They use story to transform people, to speak that to them at an intellectual, an emotional, and a spiritual level, okay? And I understand not everybody's down with the spirit part, but even there, the vast majority of decent video games do bump into religion, right? They do deal with that at some level, right? Zelda, Legend of Zelda, Super Mario Brothers, Final Fantasy, Call of Duty. All of these have religious elements in them, and if you're not seeing them, you just need to look a little harder. So basically, video games really are. I have to admit, I would love to tell you that video games are not changing hearts and minds today. They very much are, but the message is horrible. It is just the worst. So one, I know this is a long-standing debate, but I'll tell you right now, video games are not truly capable of telling meaningful stories. And I'm gonna pull the rabbit out of the hat, like the one that everybody talks about. There's never been once a single decent video game story that has been transformed to a movie that everybody can enjoy. And there are no less than 50 to 100 that have been god-awful. Just the worst, right? And if you want to talk about good, video game movies, not even great, that number is probably counted on the toes on one of your feet, right? Maybe at 1 to 5, right? I think Jumanji is the best video game movie ever made, right? Like Jumanji 2018 or whenever that came out, right? And the reality is, and I know what you're going to say, Last of Us, right, in the comments. But even that couldn't follow it up, right? Couldn't even become a trilogy. People were like gagging at the second story, right? And they bobbled the ball, like they were heading in the right direction. But the reality is, it couldn't last, right? And so that's the thing, is where Gygaxian Narrative Engine can take 1 to 4 players on a journey for 18 months and play an incredible campaign, and they'll all have a set of memories and a truly transformed lives because they've been able to experience other identities, other genders, other other worlds, other encounters. They'll be they've done combat, they've done encounters, they've done interaction. They have separate emotional sets now within their mind, separate intellectual patterns within their mind, separate sensory palettes within their mind. All this can be built by one dungeon master for 1 to 4 players through Dungeons & Dragons. The same experience just doesn't happen with video games, right? People do invest themselves and they are transformed, but you can tell. There's no parent on the planet who is saying, I wish my kid played more video games, right? There's no parent on the planet who is saying, man, I'm really glad my kid, finished that series. And frankly, generally, it is becoming well known that if you're playing 500, 1,000, 1,500 hours of a game, which is becoming more and more common, right? That, yes, there's a cream of the crop. There's a 1% that turn it into money. But even them, right? Like some of those stories don't end on well, right? And the vast majority of those people, they've got 500, 1,000, 1,500 hours invested in a video game, and what do they get back, right? Is anybody impressed? Do they, when they tell people, hey, listen, I'm going to tell you about the 1,000 hours I have in Civ 6. Who wants to hear the rest of that, right? But the reality is, if you do the same, right? If you dump 500, 1,000 hours into Dungeons and Dragons, you become a polymath, right? You have to learn about cartography and botany, and you are going to explore what different cultures are like, right? What governments are like, right? History, just so much, right? And you have to read, right? And you have to master your social self because there are people in front of you, real people, right? Who need you to be interacting with them. And video games are the exact opposite. More and more people are saying, no one's saying, I've spent 500 hours in this game and I'm just so much socially better. It's not delivering, right? And so the video games have been easily surpassed because they suck, right? They suck, right? We're 4 decades in. Can we say it now, right? Like, yes, you get Last of Us every now and then, but the reality is we got like low millions of people who have dumped 500 to 1,000 hours into a game and have shreds to look back on, right? And the vast majority of society is looking at them and going, you wasted that time, right? But the reality isn't the same for Dungeons & Dragons, right? You must become literate. You must become confident. You must become charismatic. It tests every single aspect of yourself except the physical. And even the physical. It even tests the physical. I bicycle to this day so I can fulfill the exploration pillar of Dungeons & Dragons in my real life, right? And I combat my weaknesses in my real life, and I interact with people, right? I fulfill the Dungeons & Dragons pillars in my real life. And that's why the game is incredible, and it's worth every hour you ever spend on it. And increasingly, tell me if I'm wrong, increasingly, this society is seeing that hours dumped into video games are lost. At the macro level, at the 51% level, they are lost. And no one is saying, I need my kids, my friend, my spouse to play more video games. No one, right? And that's just not the case with Dungeons & Dragons, right? People are starting to see the value of it. All that's my opinion. I say the Gygaxian narrative engine has easily surpassed the video game narrative engine. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.